I'm here to serve the greater good. I prosper and flourish wherever I go. I'm always safe and divinely protected. I'm here to serve the greater good.
This podcast is proudly supported by the Ōtara Network Action Committee, ONAC, community-owned, community-driven and community-led.
Welcome back to the We Are Ōtara podcast, sponsored by ONAC. ONAC, community-owned, community-driven, community-led. Now, we had an amazing guest by the name of Noma Sio-Faiumu. She is one of the awesome members from Sound, so that's SOUNZ. And they're an amazing group of people who are pushing for our lovely Pacifica people to go through our musical and arts avenue. So we get into a lot of things into our topics of our podcast today, especially about our generation and about our parents. I tend to think about my parents as the people who paved the way for us. So me and Norma went through those conversations, and hopefully by the end of this episode, you will go through your parents and ask them those questions that we asked the same. And now, enjoy this episode. You've heard me enough. Enjoy it right now. This is Norma. Enjoy. So how was your morning, by the way?
My morning was good.
Yeah?
Yeah, woke up late, cooked some breakfast. I haven't cooked anything for like maybe a few weeks now because I've been on an event.
Hey.
So it was good to do that.
How was that event, by the way? I was curious.
Yeah, so in the weekend was the Dawn Raids commemoration with Ngāti Whātua.
Yeah.
On Saturday, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei Marae. And we had our Pacific community, probably just about 300 people up there in ceremony in terms of coming together with mana whenua for Central Auckland. So it was a massive occasion, and it's kind of taken a while to put together and to unwind from that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You must have felt a lot of feelings out there in that event, because that the words is synonymous to, even around South Auckland, Dawn Raid. You know, I'm blessed that my mother and father had a sponsor. So they lived around the central area when they came in around the 70s. So they didn't go, I think if I remember correctly, they didn't leave that sanctum of being protected by that sponsor until like 2 or 3 years later. And the priest had made sure that their paperwork was all sorted and whatnot. So I was like very blessed for that, because then we wouldn't have had a beautiful family of 5, you know. So
Hard out.
yeah, just to see something like that, you know, it's synonymous. Tell me, with that, how was your upbringing in Ōtara? Can you give us a brief insight into your upbringing, your journey here in Ōtara?
So I'm one of 9, and we came from Sāmoa in the late 60s, I think. And our journey here was, at that time, they didn't have aeroplanes, so it was way back when, Quebec times. But so we travelled from Sāmoa to Whiki on the Tōfua boat, which was common back then. No aeroplanes going out of anywhere. So the nearest plane was Fiji, or Whiki as we referred to it in Samoa. Then we caught a plane from Whiki to Auckland, landed in South Auckland, Mangere, stayed there for a bit, moved to Otahuhu, and then came to Ōtara probably, you know, when I can't remember, maybe I was about 5 or 6 years and years ago. So went to Mayfield Primary, Beds Intermediate, Hillary College, stayed on Antrim. So we lived on Antrim Cres, near the Cassidys, near the, who else? Gosh, the Theodores, the Rickies, who I'm still very close with, Ropatas, the Iwis, all of that. They're real old families that some of them are still here, actually, I think. So I went to Mayfield Primary School, met my best friend there, Tia Riki. She still lives here on Perth Street. Nice. Her dad was, I think he was our deputy principal. So growing up, we had these really great role models of Pacific or Māori men, you know, or Māori leaders to look up to. And he was a great leader in our community also. He birthed a boy, Reuben Ricky, who was at that time also our local councillor for Ōtara and inside the Manukau City Council kind of ecosystem as such. And yeah, sadly he passed quite a while back. But, you know, a lot of the mahi that he did was really influential to the things that I do, because we're growing up around, you know, older siblings. And one thing I remember was during that time, Pacific Islanders were really a minority. You know, like now we have so many, it's the capital of the, you know, the world, the Pacific capital of the world, Ōtara, primarily, right? Yeah. And then South Auckland. But back in those days, Māori were the majority and Palangi, and Pacific Islanders were the minority. So a lot of our very close friends were very, you know, stalwart Māori families that have been here since the beginning of time. Mm-hmm. I know. And there's still some of them here, you know. And, yeah, so growing up, obviously challenges, you know, 9 kids, a lot of mouths to feed. We were also kind of, in a way, the pit stop for our people, our villages in Satapuala and Makakufulokofanga in Sāmoa, for people coming here for work or people migrating here to set up. So we were kind of like the one shop fits all, support people from our village, help find them jobs, fill out their visa papers, keep them fed, find them a house, all of that kind of stuff, which was always challenging because it always felt like we always had a full house. Yeah. I don't even remember having a bedroom. Do you know, like, you just live communally like that? Yeah. I think I didn't get a bedroom till like way older, like on my own. Do you know? Whoa. So now I love having my own bedroom. And so it's like, wow. Somewhere to lay just my head. But that's normal. That was normal, right? Yeah, yeah. That's how we made things work. And unfortunately, you know, some of those impacts of colonization and misunderstanding about our reason being here, because if we kind of dig back a bit deeper, and I don't want to get into the politics of it, but, you know, we were invited here. We're invited here to help build the city, to help build the roads, pick the fruit, pick the gardens, and, you know, all of a sudden we're no longer welcome and we're being arrested and whatnot. So I was only young back then, but I do recall being raided twice from the dawn raids, and just, I suppose, just some of the crap that comes with it too, you know.
Absolutely. And you know, you watch the documentaries and you watch because my generation never had that sort of thing happen, and I can't imagine how awful it would have been, because I thank God and I thank my mother and my father and my family who gave me the luxury to live a good life. And you know, I always remember, always first, my parents comes first, because they, like I always say to my friends, my parents paved the way for our generation to the next generation to look forward. And it was always a thing that in the back of my mind that I think about my mum, who's working at the can factory for 20 to 30 years, and then my mum went, I can't work anymore. And then my dad, who was working as a cabinet maker for a beautiful 50 years, you know, he couldn't work anymore. So I'm now making my ways up where they are, and hopefully I can make them a path to make them proud, you know.
Well, you're already starting. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure back in those days, you know, careers like being in the arts or being a journalist weren't really viable career pathways deemed by what we were raised to believe in, our limiting belief systems. You know, our parents envisioned us being doctors, lawyers, bank tellers, you know, shopkeeper owners, all of that sort of stuff. So all these other things and industries that we're now in as Pacific people, I think that's been the dream of our parents, but they've never really understood how to completely get us there. And I look at our parents' journey, right? Came here with nothing, like, you know, very little English, but they managed to set up a house, set up the churches, being a priority, and, you know, just keep bringing people over. And over time, I think being English speaking, because we weren't allowed to speak English at home, so that was a big rule for our dad. We broke it obviously often, but it was a big rule for him and my mum that we spoke Samoan at home only in English at school. And that was a challenge, you know. It was like, oh my gosh. And then growing up, you know, just all the different cultures. Ōtara was very multicultural back then. And it was normal for us, you know, like if I think about what happened in the weekend for the dawn raid ceremony, where it was coming together of Pacific and Māori community for the first time, we were doing that all back then in Ōtara because we were multicultural. So we had to find a way to sit in ceremony together or to come together in a pōhiri that was multicultural. And I always remember Tui Vākolo as being one of the staunch leaders back then, and she would be the one to kind of tell us off if we did stuff wrong in the pōhiri or set up things incorrectly. She would be that woman. But it's because of staunch people like her that were staunch about tikanga and stuff like that that really instilled in us the need to be culturally authentic and culturally, tika, like just ensuring that we're honouring our ancient processes. I don't even know how we're getting on this conversation, but it's good.
No, I love it. No, keep going. It's great.
But what I'm trying to say, I suppose, is that, you know, what we saw happen in the weekend with the dawn raid ceremony coming together and the blessing of our ancestors, our cultural protocols being weaved together in one way to be able to be all-inclusive, but to have the framework of Te Ao Māori to kind of frame that for us here on the whenua. We were doing that in Ōtara back in the day. And so there are so many of us that's a natural practice. But, you know, now there's a urgent need for us to come together more than ever, I think.
No, absolutely. As much things, the scene changes. So you got new families coming in Ōtara, and no matter what culture or race or where they belong, there's always a story behind it, and I always feel like there are always similar reasons why they came here. Like every other story, it always starts to have a beginning. You know, you're going somewhere, and that somewhere is going to lead you, or a family lead them to somewhere they need to be. And no matter what it is, it's either being a good reason why they need to be here, or the circumstances. Yeah. Like most things with culture and whatnot, what made you advocate for music in Pacifica?
So I think I grew up in the church, singing in choir. I actually come from a family who are Mormon and Catholic. So living in a household with those two religious perspectives was really interesting, but it actually helped inform a lot of my perspective, and I could see how two opposing views could coexist in one space, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like, you know, it wasn't a thing for us because we grew up with these different perspectives, that it really helped to inform a lot of, I suppose, the work I did. Growing up in the choirs, being around my friends who came from really challenging struggle families. You know, we all had a struggle one way, shape or form. Music was our expression. Music was our way out, our way to get out of the normal struggle that we didn't really want to connect with all the time. You know, I mean, we're talking about kids that, you know, that I grew up with would just have horrible backgrounds by today's standards. But by then standards, it was normal, right? It was just the normal everyday thing. And it's not what we wanted, but it's what we inherited. And we kind of know that now. I think when we can look back from where we are now, we go, oh yeah, that happened to us because we were all pushed into this whole space of Ōtara for the industrial revolution of our nation, right? You know, because this is where the power station is, all the industrial areas came, and we came here to work it. And I look back on those days. Those were hard days. our parents were working multiple jobs as well as cleaning. I remember at night my dad would finish work at, I think it was Rex Harvey, and then in the evenings would have to wait till the Star and the Criterion Tavern closed, and then we'd have to clean. So we'd have to go clean. I always remember I'd be like the first there looking for the coins and the dollars in the couch, like, here's the couch that always has this little rip and you can go in and get the money that's falling through. So I would always be like the first one to put my hand up because I knew there'd be an opportunity to find some of that extra cash. So those were good experiences. But growing up these days, we're not that, we kind of in a way tend to spoil our kids and we kind of shelter them for that. But back in those days, we had to work with our parents as part of our obligation to help them, not just be, at home doing nothing. And then I talk to my kids now these days about their life and they're like, I totally appreciate the struggle, which makes me think about me. In my own life, I appreciate the struggle. From where I'm at now, I can completely understand why that struggle had to happen for me and my family. And I honour my parents because, there's a lot of people in our Samoan community now that probably would still be doing things in the plantation. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but, here they were able to educate themselves, able to get access asset. Children are thriving and, careers and all sorts, stuff that we could have only dreamed of back then.
Yeah. And I was just thinking, you had touched upon the whole generation aspect from old generation to new generation. And I was just thinking to myself, man, if I was a parent myself, I would do the same thing, nurture and do all the things that I need that I wouldn't do necessarily as a parent. But then I think to myself, but my parents didn't do anything wrong, They also taught their ways, It may have been a little bit harsh in today's standards, but it was about discipline, and it was about also going, hey, you can't do this all the time. There's some boundaries to things. So the follow-up question would be, if you had to talk to a young generation parent who's just beginning with their first child, who's wanting to do something like the arts for, as an example, how would they lead them in that pathway? Or how would they lead them? How would you advise them in terms of helping them out grow their beautiful child into where they need to be?
I think, children come into our lives. It's life-changing having a child in your life. It's also very challenging. But in terms of how we can lead them to a pathway of musical stuff, I think it's important to expose our kids to as many different everything. You've got people in our neighbourhoods who have never been over the harbour bridge and they're adults. You've got people who have never been on a plane. I just think the more exposure that we can give to our kids, allow them to lead their journey and really just tap into things naturally. But if it was music and arts, ideal places to start them really, really young with anything. And it's never too young. My granddaughter's now 2, and when she was since she was born, we've just been on drums with her. And those that the whole rhythm thing, right? It's then, well, what's the next instrument she might be interested in learning? Not what I want to force on her, but what is it that she might like to pick up? Now she's into climbing, into swimming, but the base foundation of it for her, I think, is rhythm. And for her to know and understand her rhythm, understand how to regulate it. I think our kids can do anything that they want to do. The world's our oyster. What is, I find from my experience, has been a barrier for our kids getting access to anything is our limiting beliefs. For a long time, we believed what the media talked about us. We believed that stereotype, and we're still undoing some of that. Some of the ways that our parents have, and you've touched on it, have kind of raised us, not through the fault of their own, because they were just doing, what was best for them for that time. And so now for us, as we're, third, fourth, fifth generation parents from the polymigration, raising our kids in these suburban areas, it's important for us to anchor them, I feel, in a lot of the cultural stuff that we've realised has been lost. And we're seeing it now. I mean, never before has it been such a great time to be a Pacific person. We're seeing our languages and our cultures thriving on an annual basis. We're seeing it online more than ever. So we're tapping into all of that, the learning of our languages, our reo, the cultivation of it, and we're passing that on. The early childhood centres, these didn't exist before. Even kohanga was the only thing that existed back in those days. My kids were Pacific kids, but went to a kohanga because we didn't have aonga amata or any of those, but that was the closest language for them to kind of learn as such. Did I just go right off the question, Vincent?
No, that just flowed through to just even more answers.
Sorry.
And no, that's good because when you were talking about that sort of thing, and this is what I've learned from, we were talking about how our parents taught us things. I mentioned to you earlier about me being interested in journalism. So the very first piece that I watched was Richard Long talking about a very sensitive topic about a certain criminal that happened in South Auckland. And I won't say his name, but he framed this person as very nasty. He was doing a lot of bad things. And I picked up as a young person that if you look around the people that are watching the news, you pick up the people's, how they react. And this is from a very young age. So I would watch my father react. And when they mentioned buzzwords or keywords like South Auckland or like the job nearby, my father would have a disgusted face, and he would look at it and go, oh, no, and that's how I picked up certain things. And you mentioned about language and about the establishments of like kohangas and whatnot. I went to Clover Park Middle School, and predominantly the school had taught a lot of our Samoans, Kokandas, and Tongans how to speak Māori. It was the curriculum there. And we don't really touch about the importance of having these institutes or groups out there. And most of the time, they sometimes struggle to keep up with what's out there. How, and especially for us, because we don't really know all the answers for our families, how can we be informed with everyone around us, and how can we do that effectively for our community?
Well, I think this is a start, right? What you're doing here is about the documentation and archiving of our stories and histories before we lose it. We're in some really buzzing times, and one of those challenges for us at the moment is that, our Pacific nations are the most impacted by climate change. So it's inevitable that we're going to lose some of those islands and therefore lose some of the language and the culture and the nuances that only, what's going to happen when we lose that, right? Are we going to have a lost generation of Kiribati, or you know what I mean?
I instantly think of Niue, and I instantly think of Tokelau. And then I think of my home Sāmoa. The last time I went to Sāmoa was 2001. And I went to 1996. And I remember the beach used to be huge. It was white and beautiful. And then when I came back in 2001, that beautiful sand is gone and you just see water. And then the last time I saw a picture of Samoa, the rocks they used to block up all the the divide between sand and the road is all water. And I was like, what happened? We used to walk on the sand and it's all gone. And we're used to just speaking in English, and I noticed that my auntie is speaking in English most of the time, and I'm worried that one day she might not speak Samoan at all,
Yeah, those are all, I think, concerns, right? But like going back to your question about what can we do?
Yeah.
We're all collectively doing it. Well, you guys are definitely doing it, and this is probably just a start. How can we share our stories? We learned through the whole lockdown situation about the importance of storytelling. And I always say this to young people, my kids, when I'm working with them. You know, you need to learn to all of us have to unlearn some of the stuff that we've learned. But we know we got, gifted that. We had no choice. Got gifted a lot of those learnings and blessings, teachings through love, not always in the most loving way. But, we can unpack that for ourselves now as adults. And, I always say to people, if you're spending so much time on the internet, learn stuff. Don't just be entertained, right? There's whole therapy sessions online that can help you unpack some of the stuff if you can't get access to, if you're about going to talk to somebody. But, I just think to myself, it's important for our kids to understand how they got how they got gifted their name and why. What culture and family they were born into, because those are the two things you have no control over. You have absolutely no control over that stuff. Yeah. So for me, there lies the two key points for you to begin your journey about finding out why you exist, what is your purpose, and what are you here to do? Because if we don't understand our life purpose, I think, and I say this because, I come from a very mission-led family. Growing up, all we ever heard our parents say is, remember, we came here to do this. As soon as you get the education, we need you to go back to our village and share that knowledge. And I think that was a common instruction for most of our families, our Pacific families coming over here. It wasn't just let's go kawhao, let's go have a good time, It was never that, I felt, back in those days. Yeah. In the same way that, Kupe navigated the ocean with no compass, all the natural environment of the cosmos and whatnot. In a way, that's what our parents were doing, because they had no idea about the landscape here. They had some, but not a lot, because that was being relayed back. But we're talking back then, a time when there were no phones. So, and this is one thing I remember. I think when we arrived in New Zealand from Whiki, there was no one there to pick us up from the airport. And looking back at it, I learned that it was because they had written a letter to my uncle and auntie, but the letter didn't get here in time. Oh. So it wasn't like they could send an email, right? It was all done by letter or phone, and they couldn't always get to a phone because they had to walk a long distance to get there, and sometimes they didn't have the money to pay for the phone call. But when you think about where we've all come and where we are now, we're still a long way to go, because now I feel like we're in the age of where we recognize the impacts of a lot of traumatic historical stuff, like the dawn raids, like the influenza, all of that stuff. We had an apology for the dawn raids. Are we having an apology for the influenza? These are the questions I ask myself. And what is a true apology, right? Yeah. And it's also about, do we accept the apologies that are being given to us in this current time? Yeah. And I take my hat off to all our, never before have we seen so many Pacific and Māori ministers of colour in these spaces where we never existed. And I think that's really important to note, because we're in a time where mātauranga practices are becoming normalised within Western constructs. So for Pacific people, I ask myself, well, what is our version of mātauranga practices within this ecosystem? Yeah. And how can our traditional ancient ways, help to decolonise some of the Western constructs? Sorry, I'm going off on different things.
No, I'm lost in these words, because then you mention constructs, you mention, structure. I'm straight away thinking about the Mo Sāmoa movement, and how can we implement that beautiful energy into our current status? Because again, you mentioned that the ways of Māori has gone, and it's been interweaved into our current system, and it's cool to see that. You don't often see that around the world, and it's sad, because you have beautiful people who have already got pre-existing structure, and they got some good ideas in there, and some good, ways to follow, and look at it now. We're following them, and then it's a slow process, but we're getting there. But now let's add in our Pacifica ways of doing.
Yeah, and I think previously too, we have to remember Western Aotearoa, New Zealand, right? Let's think about the Tohunga Suppression Act, where they suppressed all of that, our natural tohunga and our leaders, and the same kind of in a way to a similar thing happened with us through the colonization of the missionaries. And I'm not saying that, gosh, I love some of it. I love wearing clothes. I'm glad I'm not running around in wintertime. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I just think, well, why is it that so many of us only remember our story as far as the missionary story? And Māori, they are just so in sync with their traditional stories. They are not myths and legends to them, and it's just that they're living and breathing their tikanga and their practices. I think we have a lot to learn from them about that. And I think, more than Māori were Pacific, were heavily colonized by religious structure. And I say that being a child who's been raised in religious conflict, and now understanding the importance of the spiritual connection more than the religious connection. And there are churches out there that do some amazing work. But, we have to also be real. We're in a time and age now where we have historical facts on so much and evidence of so many things that were practiced that should not be practiced, and we can't keep sweeping that stuff under the rug, Yeah. We have to find ways to address it, because that's all about the decolonization of our communities and putting them back into a state where we can just naturally be in our own infrastructure and system. But I feel like we're never going to get that right here in Aotearoa unless we are working in sync with Māori. Absolutely. Because they're our tuakana teina, however we want to look at it in that space. They hold parts of the knowledge that was lost to us, and we hold parts of the knowledge that was lost to them. So I think that's one of the things I kind of took away from me in the weekend that just passed, working closely with Ngāti Whātua. That was a beautiful union coming together, and they were very gracious and generous about everything that they gave to the whole kaupapa.
I was just thinking about this, and I was thinking it quite a bit. Our school curriculums learn about different parts of history. We think about our ancient history, so Greek, Roman, and then we think about our social history. So we go through the different variety of social changes. So that's like the U.S. movement during the Black movement when that was happening during that time, and then we go through other countries and their different movements. What I would like to see in our own curriculum is a proper, well-structured, with both Māori and Pacific Islander, a curriculum where we learn not just from missionaries, like you mentioned, but what our history was like. What was the stories from our Pacific Islanders? Who were our big storytellers who led the way of our, of villages who told stories about what they'd done, in the past. That would be an interesting way of learning about their history. And I definitely will say this wholeheartedly, because of our generation, a lot of them will pick up that study. And I feel that if they heard about our stories even further than what we hear now, I reckon we got a new generation that will carry that story into the future.
And that's the hope, right? Because, we know to a big extent that we inherited a defunct blueprint of how we be here. Yeah. And a lot of that involved us foregoing and losing our language and assimilating and, with Balangi systems, because it was just better to be accepted, I suppose. I don't know, and it's important in this time and age to return back to relay some of those foundations that were absent when we were growing up. And I suppose that's really what informs a lot of the work I'm doing at the moment, is kind of identifying, even within the music industry. I mean, at the moment, it's no secret, our music industry is fraught with a lot of challenges. So do we really want to keep leading our kids into an industry infrastructure that was never built for us? Or do we now address it and say some of the stuff that happens in our music industry is no longer acceptable, and we have to all be part of solving that issue, and we have to create a blueprint that works better for our people in a harmonious way that approaches it from a holistic way? Because, and I say that because artists and musicians, they draw from a very deep place of vulnerability and emotion, and they can't always turn that on and off or regulate that as well. So that's why it's important to build an infrastructure in an industry that is thriving but can support the artists. And I always say there's no artist, no healthy artist, nobody has jobs. So if we're not looking after the well-being and everything of our artists and our creators and our greatest minds and problem solvers, then, we're not doing the whole kaupapa justice, I think. So there's a lot to do. And, COVID has revealed that in all our sectors. Some of it's being reviewed in the education system all over. There are reviews happening, and I do take my hat off to people who are doing that work. Sometimes for us people on the ground, it doesn't seem like it's fast enough or done accurately enough.
Absolutely.
But there's always time, there's always opportunity to talk. And I think that's what our community, if there's a problem, instead of talking about it on social media or talking about it to, in your group, write a letter, send a letter. I think that's why white communities do so well, because you got all these little old ladies and men in Devonport. They see something wrong on the road, they write millions of letters. And they get noticed, right? But we don't like to complain. We only like to complain to us. Yeah. And we never put it in writing because we don't want to put our name to it. Yeah. But if we keep allowing that stuff to happen in our community and we keep walking by and go, oh, I don't want to deal with it. Yeah. I don't want to be, ostracized or blacklisted or stuff like that. It takes courage to do that. You're not going to be liked. But are you here to be liked? Reality, right? Yeah. Are we here to be liked, or are we here to serve in our God-given purpose? So those are always the questions that I have to ask myself before I jump into kaupapa. I have to go, why would I do that? What are the outcomes? And sometimes you just have to not overthink it and just go with what your heart is telling you. This is not right. I need to do something. Yeah. Or I need to encourage this person. And I get a lot of people who call me for, a talanoa. I've got this problem. And I'm like, I don't want to inherit any more problems. I've got enough problems of my own. I'm still trying to sort my sleeping patterns out from dawn raids, from the trauma there. But, I'm always like, do this, do that. If you just need some support, you can copy me in on stuff. But I encourage you to put it in writing, because that's the only way that people will pay attention to it sometimes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm already thinking about my letter as a 65-year-old going, Dear Richard, I'm quite upset about the park benches last week.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
But all of that stuff, some of it is minor, but to some communities it's really, really important. But there's so much here that needs to be complained about in writing and formalised, because then nothing gets done. But our community is so forgiving. They are so don't want to rock the boat. Oh, I don't want to do that.
Oh,
yeah, mai kako,
Yeah.
All of those limiting belief systems, that who are we to speak about or to speak out about our rights here, when sometimes we're struggling with our own sense of belonging here. I don't know. What else should I talk about?
No, you're right.
I don't know if I've answered any of your questions, but please, if I haven't, you just say, can you answer that again so it's clear? Yeah.
No, you've answered basically all the questions that I had, and you've answered more than just the questions. You've answered in a very, very informative way, and it's beautiful because you go from one point, but when you're an interviewer, you're watching the points being connected, and that's we go back to my childhood. I'm learning that from Richard Long, Julie Bailey, all these guys. They're interviewing people, but when they interview, it's not just question answer. It's, I will connect this question, and if this person's already connecting it, let them tell their story. And I think that's what we need to do in our generation, is that, and I believe in my generation, around our age, is that we ask our old elders the questions that we need to ask, and listen. And not just passively listen, going, actually take in, absorb as much as we can, and then we can be able to do this when our next generation comes up and they got their questions, and we can go, yes, I can answer that. You know, I want to be able to do that when I pass on to this next role, to the person who's sitting in that desk. This is how we do our things, you know, and they can be able to go, okay, my brother's coming, and I can show them how to do that. You know?
Yeah. I love that painting behind you, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, oh, wow. Didn't notice that, but it's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And it really lights you up, too. Sorry. Just the way, I'll show you, just the way you're sitting. It's sitting like a tiare over your face.
Oh.
Yeah. No, it's beautiful. I'll show you.
Hey!
Like you have an A, you know.
That's Will, our producer out there, doing his amazing work. He's a part-time interior designer, you know.
Yeah, but I mean, there's heaps to discuss. There's heaps to discuss. I just want to make sure you've got the questions answered that you wanted answered.
No, absolutely. And most of the time, the questions that I would think that someone who's from our neighborhood, from our community, would ask. And like we said, we can't really ask questions because we feel sometimes. So I'll do the hard job for them and ask the question. You know.
And that's the thing. We don't ask enough questions. Right? Why did this happen like this? What happened back in those days?
Yeah.
And I think the more that we educate ourselves on and aren't afraid to ask the questions about what happened in our past, but not live in the past, right? Yeah. Because we can't go back and change stuff that happened to us. We can most definitely learn from it and move forward. And I think that's part of our wayfinding, navigating ways and our gifts, is that we can take those learnings and go, oh, that happened, can't change it, you know, where's the next horizon?
Absolutely.
And we need to go that way. But I think it's important that we take as many of our people on that journey as well. Yeah. You know, we're the most impacted by so many things. We're overrepresented in the prison system. We're too many people, with highest rate of diabetes, drink driving, all of this sort of stuff. Why? Why are all those things like that? And it's because, obviously we know the whole merging and assimilation of different cultures and our displacement in a lot of these spaces has seen us in a way wandering around for our identity, community, connection, all of those things.
To support those movements. And I totally agree with that. Hence the reason why we do these stories. We honor the past, and then we show the future what it could be. And if only those who watch and listen are willing to help out and actually put action from words to action, then we can go forward from there onwards. Thank you so much.
No, my Lord lover. Thank you, Vincent.
I have one more question for you.
Okay, sorry.
No, I sound like I'm ending it, but no worries. So I always leave off with our viewers with a quote or a piece of scripture. Normally this is just to uplift, to remind those who are listening, who are watching, if they hear this is something to uplift them, to keep them going every day. So would you have something like that for them to hear?
Yeah, I mean, I have lots. And I am mindful because and the reason why I have this for myself is because I understand how I've been raised, and not just me, but, a whole lot of my generation have been raised by the words that have sunk into us and programmed us to be a certain way. So I've had to really spend a lot of time sharing and thinking about myself, about being more positive about the words I say to myself. So I always wake in the morning and, thank God that I've woken. My gosh, because I don't know how many, we have millions of people who don't get to see the new dawn. And some of those people get leave behind things that were undone. And I always am mindful of that too, because we live next to a cemetery where we live and work. So I'm always really mindful about those unmet dreams and aspirations of our previous ancestors. So I always wake and I'm always like, I release all pain and negativity from my life and my body. I receive and accept all love, peace, joy, and wisdom, money and harmony. And I say money specifically because we have, as a community, a very fraught relationship with money. Some of us have very negative money experiences. Some of us have not been taught about money, and some of us believe we don't deserve it. So I feel like that's a really important thing that I tried to practice in me, because I was, we're not taught like Malangis are taught, right? Wealth practices, generational wealth. We don't know any of that stuff. We know other things, but that kind of information hasn't been accessible to us in our raising. And I always try to really start it positive. I try to be really grateful for everything I have. And I always end it with, I'm here to serve the greater good. I prosper and flourish wherever I go. I'm always safe and divinely protected. I'm here to serve the greater good. Those are just things I constantly am reminding myself of. I think everybody needs to find a practice like that, because there is a lot of, if we want to talk about how we decolonize outside of us, we actually have to start with us. Yeah. We have to start decolonizing and deprogramming ourselves in a way that's more succinct with natural laws, natural indigenous practices, and sit and happiness. Because, honestly, I was in stressful roles for such a long time, and I just, once you start to feel the stress in your body and in your brain, and you're losing sleep over stuff, it's just like, this is a no-brainer. I can't be in this space anymore. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. Absolutely.
Life is fleeting.
And pretty much, you got to do your best to live it fully and live it to your best.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Vincent.
No worries.
Awesome.
And once again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. Kia ora.